Hello everyone, welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. If you're new, I cover some of the news and politics that was in the last week, and if I have time, I look ahead to the future. And as always, if you like it, please give a like and subscribe. So this is a little bit different than usual. I thought with some downtime, we would have a good time to get into some of the political philosophers of Western societies and how that influences American politics today. Unlike most people when they talk about this, we are going to have some modern day connections because normally this is not something I'm very interested in. And if you like this is not normally a video I would make, then let me know, as always. And as we go through, I'll be proposing some questions, and I want you to think about the answers to some of these questions. The biggest issue in the sky-high view of politics is what is the role that government is supposed to play in our lives? That is basically the question that is above every policy, that is budgetary, political, and social question from the dawn of man until this moment. Underpinning that question is what humans are like, and today we are going to break that down. As with all complicated questions, there is no one good answer. And I'm not going to conclude by saying humans are good, or that humans are bad, or that this is the role that government should have in our lives. That's been debated for thousands of years, and it will be debated until eventually the sun blows us all up. So, the most political philosophers begin with human nature. And let's begin with Thomas Hobbes, who lived in the 1600s in the United Kingdom. He is most famous for his line that life is nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes believed that people are self-centered and self-interested, and generally he had a pessimistic view of human nature. There is an idea of the state of nature in many philosophies, and this state of nature being that there is no government, hypothetical anarchy. So what would life be like? For Hobbes, the state of nature was not a good thing, and that we created a sovereign, i.e. government, and transferred our rights to the government in exchange for security. Then you have Rousseau, who lived a century later, where humans lived in solitary, peaceful, and equal lives. And unlike Hobbes, Rousseau did not believe the state of nature was chaotic. Essentially, he believed the opposite of Hobbes, that society corrupted man rather than man corrupted society. He believed inequality we see began with private property, competition, and social comparison between individuals and societies. He believed that true freedom is not doing whatever you want, but living under the laws you help create. So basically, you have to force people to be free, which is quite paradoxical. So this creates an interesting tension, and this is the first stop on our journey today. Are humans fundamentally corrupt or not? If you say yes, you may lean toward Hobbes. If you say no, then you might lean toward Rousseau. Personally, I tend to lean toward yes, so I have a more Hobbesian view of this. So our next question is the rights and purpose of government. This is where I introduce John Locke. John Locke, in many ways, has the founding ideas of our country. Locke believes that we were all born with natural rights. We have rights given to us that existed before government did. Those rights are life, liberty, and property. Does this sound familiar? It's in the Declaration of Independence, except property was changed to pursuit of happiness for political and social reasons at the time. Our founders didn't pull those words out of thin air. Government, for Locke, exists to protect these rights. And unlike Hobbes, Locke believed that the state of nature was mostly peaceful and governed by reason. But there is no authority that settles or disputes to protect rights in the state of nature. He doesn't say that there's no conflict in the state of nature, but that there isn't constant warring factions like Hobbes. So we form a social contract, aka a government. For Hobbes, this social contract cannot be broken. Once we form a government, that's it. We can't go back to the state of nature. For Locke, we can dissolve the contract and return to civil society, but not the state of nature. What is civil society? Everything but the government. So in the general interaction between humans without government, things like economics, religion, social groups, things like that. So what do we mean by dissolving the contract? Well, a revolution. Interestingly, Locke is the first to defend private property. You can see how this builds from Marx, where that's flipped on its head. The idea is property is mixed with your own labor, and therefore it becomes yours. Therefore, government exists to protect our rights and our property. So the next question is, do you believe that government protects our rights or controls them? Perhaps a little bit of both. I tend to believe that it protects our rights. Next, we're going to move on to Edmund Burke. Burke is my favorite personal philosopher, so I might seem a little bit biased here. Burke takes some aspects of the others that we mentioned. He also lived in the 18th century in the UK, and he wrote about the French Revolution opposing it. And I would consider him to be the founder of old conservatism, not neoconservatism, but old conservatism. You'll see elements of the others in here. Burke believed in slow and tradition-based change. So the idea that of Locke, an overthrowing government rapidly like they did in France and then in America, horrified him. He liked slow, cautious, and organic change. He also didn't like ideological theories. He didn't like replacing institutions in France like monarchy and church with abstract ideals like liberty and equality. As for freedom, he supported freedom, but it has to exist within a stable social order guided by institutions and laws. Most interestingly, and I believe this strongly, he believed that social contract was not just made by all of us who are alive, but it is a connection to the past and to the future. So the idea that we are connected to those who came before us and those who are yet to come. Once again, this ties back to the idea that things need to change slowly. And as for government, he was a member of the British Parliament. He believed that instead of politicians following the will of the voters blindly, that they should use their judgment. So you can see there is some skepticism of entrusting the masses. And you can see the contract between Burke and the previous Rousseau and Locke. And this is me speaking now. I believe strongly that we are products of our time, and that his time was a time of rapid change with the American War of Independence and the collapse of the French monarchy, which scared him. So that brings us to our next question. Do you believe that change should be slow and gradual, or do you believe that sometimes things need to be changed more radically? If you are more of an American conservative, you probably wouldn't like him because he believed in bigger government to keep order and stability. In fact, Trump would probably be considered more of a Burkean conservative because he's bigger government, although he's not so much about slow social change. But if you're an older conservative, as I might be considered, then that wouldn't be a big deal. So for someone who is socially conservative but fiscally liberal, like I am, it would be more of a fan of Burke as opposed to someone who's socially liberal but fiscally conservative. The idea that government has an active role in our lives, but other institutions of old, like the church, family, and social group around us, that grounds us in tradition in our day-to-day lives. And then lastly, we're going to end with Karl Marx, who is the one you probably all know the best. If you don't know, Karl Marx wrote about communism in the 19th century, and he believed that government was fundamentally tied with economic systems, and I actually agree with him on that. And unlike many of the others, like Locke, who believed that government and economics were separate, he believed that they were fundamentally merged together. He wrote about communism. He saw communism as the next step in human history. We went from feudalism to capitalism, then we would go from capitalism to communism, and then eventually history would end, and that we would all live in the state of utopia, basically. He believed that government protected the interests of the ruling classes in a capitalist society, and societies believed that the tension between the rich and the poor would make revolution inevitable. And after the revolution is over and the dust settles, there will be no more classes, no more private ownership, and therefore no need for the state, and then history, as I said earlier, would completely come to an end. And I think in many ways this is almost us returning back to the state of nature where we began. Hobbes and Locke saw a world without government and built it around it, while Marx saw a world with government and tried to imagine a world without it. And ironically, like Reagan and conservatives today, Marx believed that government was the problem because it protected the interests of the top. And I actually agree with a lot of the fundamental concerns about communism. Like, for example, I do believe that if government protects the interests of the ruling class in a capitalist society, that it will eventually lead to revolution. Except I believe that if we do have a revolution like they did in France in 1700s, then it will lead to not a utopia, it would lead to a dystopia. And then you see like the Soviet Union as an example. So I agree with the fundamentals of what might happen with what Marx said, but not how good or bad it would be. And then that leads us to our final question. If Hobbes said we needed strong authority to control chaos, Locke said we needed government to protect our rights, and Rousseau said it should reflect our will, and Burke warns us not to tear it all down, and then Marx comes in and says, what if this whole thing we built was a system that just benefits those at the top? So that's kind of something to think about here. And that's where we will leave it. As I said in the beginning, every argument we have goes back to the role of government in our lives and nature. Are people self-interested like Thomas Hobbes? Are we shaped and corrupted by society, as Rousseau said? Does government exist to protect our rights, like Locke believed? Should we be cautious and preserve what works, like Burke said, or is the system rigged against the masses, only benefiting those at the top, according to Karl Marx? Or is it perhaps a combination of some or all of them? There is no final answer that's correct, and whatever you believe likely shapes your worldview. And for me, I do believe people are self-interested. We don't have natural rights except those given by God, and that we should be cautious and preserve what works, like Burke said. And if you think about government or policy, then think about what works under the hood. If you have a pessimistic view of human nature, you might be skeptical of a government program to the poor because you are concerned about abuse. If you have a more optimistic view, you would believe that the government serves to protect our rights, like Locke wrote. So that's where the real argument was. And if you enjoyed this kind of episode, let me know, and I'll definitely do more of these. I have a few that I'm thinking about in the future. But thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.